Hey folks, Jimmy here, aka Palette of the Dead. Welcome back to the channel and welcome to the latest issue of Warhammer Age of Sigmar Stormbringer magazine. Now, as per usual with all these videos, if you like them, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and of course, drop us a comment down below. Love hearing back from you guys. It goes a massive way to helping out the channel too. Now, this week we're on issue 50 of Stormbringer magazine. It is a paint issue, nothing to write home about. I mean, it's not too bad. So, first off, we have Dawnstone. So Dawnstone is a mid-tone grey, halfway in between good old Mechanic Standard Grey and, say, Administratum Grey. So it works right in between the two. So it's obviously that mid-tone. Pretty decent. You're probably not going to use shed loads of it, in all honesty. The other thing we get is we get a texture paint, which we'll talk about in a second, but we get a texture spreader. So texture spreaders obviously very, very handy and work hand in hand with texture paints. So you have a scoop end, you have a flattening end. So depending on which kind of textures you're doing, yeah, you're going to need one of these. Fairly easy. Obviously with textures, you don't really want to use a brush because they will knack of a brush. So this is the perfect tool for you. Then we move on. So we're going to talk about the texture paint. So texture paint, we get a Grellan Earth. So a Grellan Earth is like a crackle paste kind of paint. So it's kind of got that dry earth look. So for instance, when you look at, say, like the ground underneath grass during summer, for instance, and it's dried up and it's quite dry and you can see all the cracks in the earth and everything like that, that is how this resembles, in all honesty. It's fairly decent. I personally don't use crackle ones very often because they do have a habit of flaking off a little bit easier, and I don't like that. Now, the thing with texture paints is you don't use them on your model, you use them on the base. And the reason for this is because you don't really want a textured model. Unless you're doing, I don't know, a camouflage cloak or something like that, then maybe you want something a little bit that resembles a bit of camouflage. So if you're doing a 40k cloak for, say, like the infiltrators or anything like that, then you may want to have kind of a bit of a paste over it to kind of show a transition between colours or something like that, maybe. But anyway, that works as a kind of crackle paste. You can get other types of diorama effects and such like, and pastes for the bases for different minis. So one of the main other ones is Sterling Mud. So Sterling Mud is kind of like a sandy kind of paste. So it has a bit more of that kind of effect. So it's a bit more kind of like it's rougher ground and sandy and a bit more kind of wet, and it's a brown paint. You can also use other companies. So like for instance, I use Vallejo ground texture. In all honesty, this pot cost me, I think, I don't know, £6-7 about 5 years ago, and it's still going strong. There's still about a third of it left in there, in all honesty. And I use this a lot. So I use this on most of my bases. It's kind of a beigey, horrible looking colour, but you can paint over it. So for instance, if I grab Igrot, so I've used that on there as well, so it gives it that kind of grey appearance when you paint over it with grey. So you can use a bit of grey, you can use a bit of Norn oil over it and a dry brush, and happy days, it will look fairly decent and changes the complexion of the ground texture that you are after. So very, very easy to use, but whatever you do, do not put it on with a brush, as I say, because it knackers the brush up. You'll get in between the bristles and yeah, be absolutely horrible, and you're never going to wash that out very well. So whatever you do, don't use it on that. But fairly decent. You will need to shake them every now and again because they can get a bit watery, and they do start to separate like all paints do, but otherwise it's fairly decent. So not too bad in the end. But my personal recommendation is, if you want to get more bang for your buck, don't buy the Citadel ones, buy the Vallejo ground effects. You can get them on Element Games, you can get them from Wayland Games, Goblin Gaming and places like that. If you do want to order from Element Games or Wayland Games, I have got affiliate links in the description down below. You can always use them. Obviously not an ad. If you do use them, it just gives me a little bit of a kickback. That's all it is. It's not enough for me to retire on. in all honesty. Anywho, let's move into this week's issue. So going into issue 50, first off we're greeted by the realm of metal and its mercurial history. So Shamon is a mysterious place of alchemy and transformation. The coming of Tzeentch in the Age of Chaos turned the realm into a perpetual battlefield, but its stalwart and resourceful inhabitants have remained unconquered to this day. In this land of endless change, war is eternally raging. So Grungni's gifts. After the God King Sigmar freed Grungni from his chains during the Age of Myth, the Smith God turned his attention to the lands of Shamon. He created many wonders, including great cities, the World Hearth, and the uniformly straight God-wrought isles. To each of Grungni's worshipper clans, a different island was given to make their home, and great civilizations flourished in the lands that were made for them. But that was not the end of Grungni's gifts. As he laboured on his creation, his breath mixed with the ash from his forge, forming clouds of a substance that is now called ether gold. This magical material is highly sought after to this day for its alchemical and technological properties, and it is key to the Hadron Overlord's technology. Moving on to the other side though, obviously we get a bit more information. So the coming of Tzeentch. So as the Age of Chaos dawns, Tzeentch's demons poured through a great rift in the sky over Shamon. An era of terror and darkness descended on the realm. Demons fell upon the lands following the scent of Shamanite and mercilessly attacking the realm's inhabitants. And then obviously the Forging of Union. So as the Age of Sigmar began, the agents of Sigmar sought out the Duardin to rekindle the old alliances and retake the realm from chaos. After rallying with the ground dwellers of Shamon to secure the realm gates, Sigmar's armies were joined by the Hadron Overlords, war in the air against the disc-riding Zangors and flying demons of Tzeentch. So, a bit more information about Shamon that you probably may not want to know. Anyway, but yeah, not too bad. And then we're going to move on to techniques about basing. So basing, obviously you can do a lot of things with basing, and there are some quite good fun bits as well that you can do. So you can utilize parts that you may not have used for other units. So for instance, helmets for Stormcast Eternals, shields that you may not have used for Grots or good old Cruel Boys, or even the occasional Stormcast you may not have used a shield for, who knows. The weapons, helmeted heads, unhelmeted heads, body parts, fungus from other bits, and more. So you can get a lot of little bits all off the other parts from minis, so you don't have to chuck away loads and loads and loads of plastic just for sprues themselves. So if you want to, you can cut all of these off. There is a trick though, because obviously you're going to be left with arms on things and stuff like that. There are tricks, and the magazine does actually teach you some tricks to go through. So fairly easy in some places. So for say things like the Stormcast helmets, obviously you've got these little bits where you've got the base of the neck and stuff like that, and you don't want that on your mini because it will look weird. So it tells you, cut it off, smooth it out, happy days. Fairly easy to do, in all honesty. You can do it with other helmeted heads as well. Shields, you can cut off the arm on the inside of a shield. It is a little bit awkward, I'm not going to lie to you, but it can be done. You just need to take your time over it. And even things like any of the other shields. And you can also obviously cut them to make them so look like they're standing out of the ground and such like. When it comes to weapons, it can be a little bit more tricky. So you have got to try and cut off the hands and smooth where the hand is to gently kind of blend it all back into itself, so it looks like there's no hand and a hand was never holding it in the first place. It's not easy. That can be a little bit more tricky because some parts can be a pain in the ass. You can also cut certain weapons in half to kind of make it look like they've been broken or something like that. You can cut the tips off of swords and blades and stick them out of the ground if you wish to. Entirely up to you, but you can do these little bits. Even things like the Tree Lord head, spare heads, you can cut off parts and make it look like just branches sticking out of the ground. Entirely up to you. It also teaches you about utilising it for things like base coverage and stuff like that. So Entirely up to you how you want to go about doing it, but adding a couple of pieces every now and then can work quite well. So for instance, if you only have small bases, you don't really need to add much to it. I don't always bother. But if you want to, you can always, of course, add a few more to like your larger bases and add a couple of bits and pieces. You can get Citadel skulls, you can get 3D printed pieces, you can get things like the Citadel vines and stuff like that. You can get all sorts. You can get static grass as well, so you can do a lot with it for not a lot of effort. So it just makes the model stand out a bit better. So for instance, back to his Stormcast Tunnel, it's got a couple of patches of grass on there and a half skull. So that, I just left it at that. I didn't want to put shed loads on there, although I could have put a couple more bits on there to make it stand out a bit differently, but I didn't want to. There are other parts obviously that you can do, so you can add extras to them and you can make rocks and such like. The thing to do though is, if you are doing that, glue it down and then use a bit of texture paste over it, so the ground looks like it's kind of sticking up out of the ground sometimes, and it can work very, very well. You do get some bits that have already kind of been done for you and kind of look a bit different, so you get like the different little creatures that you got with the Tree Lord Ancient or Spirit of Durthu, whatever you want to call it, not long ago. You can utilize that, but yeah, entirely up to you, but you can get a load of bits to kind of make the base stand out a bit better. Then it moves on obviously to how a Grellan earth works. So as I say, it's a crackle paste, so this is what it's going to look like where if you put it on thick. That's what it looks like if you put it on thin. If you put it on as a thin layer, it dries with smaller cracks all over the place. The thicker it is, the bigger the cracks. So that's how it works. So it just depends on how you want it to go. So you can obviously do a thin layer and then put over a bit of more thick over the top and give it a kind of a bit of a different texture. Entirely up to you, but yeah, it's your choice. With all of them, I would always paint the base first personally, because then you've got a different color that kind of comes through underneath all of them cracks. So if you're going over them cracks over a standard black base, it's just going to show black underneath. If you use, say, Fondia brown or Mornfang brown or Catachan flesh or whatever you want to do, and then your Grellan earth over the top, it's got that brown texture kind of colour underneath already for you, so it doesn't separate too badly, and it works very, very differently. And then obviously making sure you're doing any of your shading and textures and dry brushing and all that type of stuff. Have fun with it. It's fairly simple to do, you can't go wrong, but you can make your bases stand out far better for your minis, which improves the look of your work, in all honesty. There are obviously other things that you can do. So for instance, if you buy, say, cork, so for instance I did this Tomb King, and all I did was I've got some cork board, I cut a chunk out to roughly the same size, took some chunks out of it to smooth it off, makes it look like a bit like a rock, stick it down, paint it up, dry brush over it, stick your mini on top of it, happy days. Works fairly well. It's a fairly simple technique, but you can have your models kind of stood so they're slightly higher if you wish to. Entirely your choice though. Moving on now, we're kind of done talking about basing and stuff like that. Obviously it tells you how to paint up your bases, dry brushing and everything like that. In all honesty, it's fairly straightforward, fairly easy. Paint all your little details that you've added to your base as well. So if you've added skulls and creatures or mushrooms, make sure you paint them up because it'll make them look far better. If you leave them blank, it looks terrible, it doesn't look right, and yeah, you need to paint it to match your mini and to match the look that you're going for. So, and just use the same techniques that you've painted up minis before really with. In all honesty, you can't go wrong with it. Have a bit of fun with it, but dead easy really. And yeah, simple as happy days. Once you're done, you're going to have a load of bases that look kind of like that, I imagine. And yeah, they're pretty decent, they're pretty good. It works, does exactly the job that you need it to do. So yeah, happy days. And then moving on, we're going to go into this week's battle. So this week's battle, using the Fury of the Forest, and we have our forces, so pick your options, have a bit of fun with it. enjoy. Battle plan's fairly simple. So you have your destruction territory in the middle and your order coming from both sides. So for instance, if you're using the forces of order, you might want to have your Sylvaneth coming from one side, Stormcast from another, or like a pincer movement, maybe. Who knows? Your choice. And that's it, really. So fairly straightforward, fairly easy. Yeah, you're not going to go wrong with it, I can imagine. Have a bit of fun. And then moving on. So, next week, issue 51, we get our Loon Boss on Giant Cave Squig. I'm looking forward to this guy. This guy will be fun to do and quite enjoyable. And then in issue 52, we get another one that's quite fun to do and something very, very different. We get an Endrin Master with dirigible suit. So our first Haradron Overlord mini. They're pretty cool. A lot of metallics going on with them. If you're going to paint them up that way, your choice. Have a bit of fun with it, but think about how you might want to go painting up that mini. Anyway, that is it from me. Thank you very, very much for watching, and I will see you sometime soon. Bye bye now.